Hey everyone, welcome. So today, we're going to dive into one of the absolute fundamentals of JavaScript. It's data types. You know, getting a good handle on these is kind of the first big step to writing solid, bug-free code. Because honestly, getting them mixed up is such a classic source of headaches. So let's get right into it. Have you ever just stopped and wondered about the magic of JavaScript? I mean, you can hand it a number, then a bit of text, and it just gets it. It knows what to do, and you never had to explicitly tell it, hey, just so you know, this is a number. So how in the world does it figure that out?
Well, the secret sauce here is something called dynamic typing. And really, that's just a fancy way of saying JavaScript is smart. It's smart enough to figure out the data type all on its own, right when you create a variable. You just give it the data, and it does all that classification work for you, behind the scenes.
Okay, so to actually see what JavaScript is thinking, to pull back that curtain, we need a special tool. And for our little tour today, our guide is going to be the typeof operator. Seriously, think of it like a magnifying glass. It lets us zoom in on any piece of data and see exactly what JavaScript thinks it is.
The way it works is super simple, but it is really powerful. You literally just put the word typeof right in front of any variable, and it gives you back a little piece of text, a string, that tells you its data type. It's our key to understanding what's really happening under the hood of our code. Let's see it in action.
So let's kick things off with the simplest, most common data types you're going to run into. These are often called the primitive types. They're the absolute, rock-solid fundamentals.
First up, we've got numbers. As you can see, if we make a variable x and set it to 40, typeof tells us, plain and simple, it's a number. Now, the really important thing to know here is that JavaScript doesn't care if it's a whole number or a decimal. Whether you write 40 or 40.5, to JavaScript, it's all just one thing, a number.
Okay, so that's a number. But this leads to a super common question, especially when you're starting out. What happens if we take that same number, 40, and we wrap it in quotation marks? Is it still a number? And the answer is a big, emphatic no. The second those quotes go around it, JavaScript stops seeing it as a value you can do math with. It is now just text, which in programming we call a string. The big takeaway? You can't add, subtract, or do any math with this thing anymore. It's just a piece of text that happens to look like a number.
And of course, this is what you'd normally think of for a string, right? Just plain old text. It doesn't matter if it's one letter, a word like ChiruCodes, or a whole paragraph. If it's inside quotes, its type is always going to be string.
All right, let's move on to our next primitive type. And this one is at the absolute heart of all decision-making in your code. We're talking about booleans. These are your simple yes or no answers.
A boolean can only ever have one of two values, true or false. That's it. They're what power all of your if statements and loops. But, and this is super important, look closely at how false is written on the slide. See that? No quotes. It's not a word, it's a special keyword in the language. And yeah, this slide really nails that point. Without quotes, false is a logical Boolean value. It's a no. With quotes, false is just a word. It's a string made up of 5 letters. This tiny little difference in your code makes a massive difference in how it all works. It is a classic beginner trap for sure.
Okay, so we've got the simple, primitive types down. Now let's level up and talk about something a little more complex. We're heading into the world of objects, which is basically JavaScript's go-to category for any kind of structured or complex data.
You really have to think of the object type as this big umbrella term. It's like a giant bucket that JavaScript throws most of its non-primitive values into. So when you're dealing with things like lists of data in arrays, or more specialized things like sets, maps, or even dates, you'll find they all report back as being this one general type.
So for instance, right here we're creating a set, which is this neat collection that only lets you store unique values. But when we ask JavaScript, hey, what's the type of this thing? It doesn't say set. Nope, it just gives us that general classification, object.
And guess what? It's the exact same story with dates. You'd think there'd be a date type, right? It seems logical. But JavaScript doesn't have one, at least not as far as typeof is concerned. When you create a new date, you're actually making an object. So again, typo just tells us it's an object.
All right, that was a whirlwind tour, I know. So let's pull everything together into a quick and easy cheat sheet that just summarizes everything we just looked at. So here it is, all laid out for you. A plain old 40, that's a number. Put those quotes around it, and boom, it turns into a string just like any other piece of text.
The special keyword false with no quotes, that's our boolean. And finally, those more complicated structures we looked at, like a set or a date, they both just show up under that big object umbrella. A great little table to keep in your back pocket.
So, the big takeaway here is that now you know how to check what type of data you're working with. But that leads to an even more fascinating question. What happens when JavaScript, on its own, decides to change a variable's type right in the middle of your code? Well, that process has a name. It's called type coercion. And trust me, it's the next big step on your JavaScript journey.